Our next speaker really needs no introduction, but I'm still going to kind of say a few words. Sean Ammirati, who's also the co-founder of Corporate Startup Lab, I think he really embodies what we try to do at CSL. Our goal is to bring together folks from different avenues, investor world, startup world, academic, and corporate, and he actually happens to cover, I think, all of those boxes by himself. And over the years, what I've always really appreciated about Sean is that he has a pulse on kind of the current trends happening, and he knows how to look at those trends and have a vision for, okay, what does this mean? What could this become? And so whenever, kind of Sean's talking about something he's observing and what he's thinking about it, I always want to make sure I'm paying attention because it could be insight into the next big trend. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sean Ammirati to talk about designing an AI collaboration stack.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so I love the title of this program, AI Next. I'm guessing that credit may go to the front table here on that. No, somebody else. But anyways, I love that topic, and I was thinking about this, right? Like, what are we in 5 years? What are we going to be talking about as it relates to AI in business? And we've, I think, had some really interesting conversations this morning, and I'll do my best to kind of pivot us to some more interesting conversations this afternoon. And I was thinking about it. I think in 5 years, when we talk about AI for business, it's going to be a lot like when people talked about e-business, not 25 years ago, right? Like, in fact, at Carnegie Mellon in the late 90s, you could get a master's in e-business. Like you could actually, on your diploma, it would say like you have a master's in e-business. Today, I think we call that an MBA. Right? And I think right now, there's a lot of conversations about like AI for business. And I suspect if you fast forward 5 years, we're just going to call this business. Now, that does not mean that all the things you've heard about are not incredibly important, because I think they are. But I think they're going to feel like table stakes in 5 years, right? Like, when's the last time you pulled your management team together to talk about like, well, we should really talk about our e-business strategy. Like, people would think you were joking with them, right? This is just how you do business today. And I think AI is the same way. And if that's true, then I think it's worth thinking a little bit about like, okay, well, let's think about the last time we went through one of these, right? And there was lots and lots of venture capital that went into it. Industries were transformed, and for what it's worth, we're outpacing, if you use venture as a proxy for excitement around a trend, we're actually outpacing even the dot-com bubble in the heat of the dot-com bubble, right? So at the peak in 99, 55% of venture investments were e-commerce and were e-business or dot-com companies, right? It was 71.1%. The last time they reported the data on this. So about 15% more, right? And if you think about what happened last time, right? We built a lot of companies like pets.com, but we also built a lot of Amazons, right? And I think if you were to kind of think about what is this going to look like in 5-10 years from now, I think there'll be the equivalence of lots of pets.coms and lots of Amazons, right? And I spent some time in venture. Sean, who was my mentor, is here. Like I think venture, we know what we're signing up for when we do that, right? So that's just the game. And if you're good at it, you pick more of the Amazons and fewer of the pets.coms, and that works out. But I think it's worth remembering that we also created lots of corporate startups. And for those of you who've heard me talk over the years, I love to talk about Apple and the iPhone as the greatest example of a corporate startup. It's also, by the way, a corporate startup that you can point to where most of the founders are Carnegie Mellon founders. So when Meredith this morning was talking about all the value that was created by Carnegie Mellon entrepreneurs, she left out all the market cap that was created from Apple on the back of the iPhone. So I'd like to say like we might be doing quite a bit better than just the GDP of Belgium, which I think is just upside to what you've heard. But if you think about it in the internet moment, right, there were both kinds of companies created. And one of the interesting questions was like, well, which of these leveraged incumbency advantage like Apple, and which of these created brand new businesses? And I would just say, and again, you've heard me give this talk lots of times on corporate startups, but I would just say, I'm really excited as it relates to this transformation about corporate startups specifically. This is not to say that I don't think there will be plenty of traditional startups. I started a company a year ago. I clearly believe there's opportunities to build big, new traditional companies. But in general, this transformation we're living in right now, I'm super excited about corporate startups specifically, because when I think about what's easy, what's becoming easier, and in this sort of moment we're living in right now, I think the things that are becoming easier make these three things much more valuable. Unique data sets, unique expertise, and customer relationships. And the reality is, if you were to compare traditional entrepreneurs, like 3 people in the Schwartz Center upstairs working on an idea, versus one of our Fortune 500 companies here in Pittsburgh, right? The Fortune 500 company is going to over-index on all 3 of these things relative to the 3-person startup. And so I'm super excited about corporate startups and more opportunities to create more of these. That does not mean that there won't be traditional startups. I'm actually very excited about the companies in the Schwartz Center upstairs as well. But the point is, I think there's an incredible opportunity for companies to build these kinds of things. And when I think about this, I want to zoom in a little bit on the data piece of this today. And we've talked a lot about this morning already. But I actually want to go back to some things that some of you may remember if we take a quick trip down memory lane here. So in 2016, some of you guys remember, I wrote a book. If you're having trouble sleeping, I hear it does solve that problem for you. But beyond being good for clearing sleep problems, right? The book was called The Science of Growth, and we talked about how startups scale. We compared, Facebook versus Friendster, WordPress versus movable type. And we kind of built this evidence-based looking at kind of how do startups start, the prerequisites, the catalyzing events, and then ultimately, once they succeed, what are the things that make them sustainable for long-term growth? And on the back of that, many of you remember, a lot of the people who bought the book, we certainly sold plenty of those books to 2-person startups. But the book sales really worked well because lots of your companies bought the book, and lots of companies across the country and the world bought the book. And as we went around and had conversations with people about the book, 2 of the topics that everybody wanted to talk to us about were thinking about network effects and being data-informed, not data-driven. So this was, by the way, this was 2016. I'd just like to take a little credit for the Tepper branding, data-informed, human-driven. We were kind of 80% of the way there with a chapter in the book. But we talked a lot about that. And then on the back of that, thanks to Dave Mawhinney, we started the Corporate Startup Lab, right? I remember talking to Dave about all the companies who were buying these books, and they're interested in it. It was like, hey, maybe we should talk about a lab like CSL. And so in 2018, we started doing the project course, and CSL got started. And one of the things that we would talk about was those 2 concepts, being data, like how to think about data and how to think about networks. And Matt Crespi, who some of you will remember if you've been around CSL for a long time, right? We would draw pictures like this on the board, and we talk about what's a network and how are networks connected. And we'd kind of explain the original CSL network with 4 people. This is not Sean Mawhinney, by the way, although later came in and did a much better job as the better Sean on the CSL team. But we talk about Dave, Hallie, myself, kind of Matt, we were kind of, how are we connected, right? And then we would talk to you guys about this. And some of you may remember all the conversations we had about bipartite networks, right? And how you could talk about connecting multiple different types of digital connections with humans, and we talked about digital business models. Tim's here from MSA Safety Company. I think on the back of that, right, we helped MSA create a company called Safety.io, and many of your companies, we talked about this as well. So that's the conversation that we had over the years at CSL. When I think about the moment we're living in right now, if I were going to redo, the animation's going to make this hard. If we're going to re-talk about this today, those 2 things, I'd actually probably want to talk to you about it this way. And hopefully this is a nice build from the lunch conversation as well, right? I would talk about connecting 3 different types of systems today. I'd want to talk about connecting humans to structured systems. That's what we talked about. That's what we talked about in 2018, right? How does MSA use the data they have and their customers to make smart predictions around when there will be safety issues. That was Safety IO. And what's the right division between what do humans do and what do structured systems do. But as we've been talking about this morning, right, there's like another type of node in that network. There's the human node in the network, there's the structured systems node in the network, and then there's the semi-structured systems or the LLMs in the network. And I'm going to argue that like the art of what we're doing today is figuring out what the right work is to give to any of these pairs. So to me, the question is like, just like before, it was like, well, what do you let humans do? And what do you let structured systems or classic compute do, right? And you kind of divide it between those two. It's like, well, what do you give to the pair of structured systems and humans? What do you give to the pair of humans and the LLMs? But don't miss the bottom arrows back and forth too, right? When you think about context engineering, or everything being context, right? There's also LLMs, not just talking to data, but it's LLMs talking to other compute systems, right? And in many ways, like those connections become quite powerful as well. And a colleague of ours, actually, Dave and I first got to know Fraser when we were running our second startup. Fraser ran business development at the time for a company called GetGlue, which was one of our biggest partners at Umspoke. But Fraser went on to be the chief product officer at OpenAI, and he's now a partner at a venture fund in San Francisco and Boston, Spark Capital. He's been talking a lot about the way to make these connections between structured, semi-structured, and humans is what he calls proof of work. And the point is you want the LLMs or the computer systems to give you output that both humans can understand and audit, but that those other systems can interact with. And when you think about proof of work as it relates to this, there's one obvious example of this, right? We had a workshop yesterday that some of you were part of. We talked about like, well, what are the killer apps of agents in the enterprise today? And there's a lot of conversation around software development agents, right? Why are software development agents so powerful? And like, it's both, they're powerful in the sense like lots of people are using them and they're delivering real value. The reason they're so valuable is when you think about a software development agent, it creates code, right? That's what the output is. And it turns out computers know how to process code and humans know how to look at what the code renders. So basically, when you think about a software development agent, it checks all three of those boxes, right? It can send the right work to the human, the right work to the LLM, and the right work to the classic compute system. And because of these things, then all of them can pick the right collaboration between the three. And there's different ways they could do that, right? You can think about that at the like GitHub Copilot level. You can think of that at the like OpenDevin level, right? Anywhere in that stack, the point is like you can end up having humans and computers interacting together and end up with effective agents there. So this is from an Anthropic blog post, the link's in the bottom there, but this is an example of that flow, like humans, structured, and semi-structured systems going back and forth, writing software code, right? So there's the human going back and forth to clarify with the LLM what it's asking to build. When the LLM is sure it understands, it then sends that to the LLM, which interacts with the environment. You can think of that as the compute system. That goes back and forth, and then it brings it back, and through the interface, ends up rendering that in whatever the right format is there. So that works super well as it relates to software development agents. The question you should all be thinking about, though, is unless you're a programmer, that's probably not the type of agent that you've interacted with. Right? Most of you, I mean, in a room at Carnegie Mellon, most of you probably have interacted with a software development agent, but in the world at large, you probably haven't interacted with those kinds of systems. The agent that most of us have interacted with, right, would be the deep research agents, right? Whether it's OpenAI's deep research or Perplexity deep research, those would be the agents that most people think about today. And I just want to say, like, this time last year, we were talking a lot about, hey, LLMs are really going to be good at research. That was like one of the things we talked about last year. We were so close to getting the branding right, by the way. Jim, if I just would have said LLMs are really good at deep research, we could have said like we coined the term deep research at the CSL forum last year, but we didn't. I just kept saying, guys, trust me, they're really good at research. Pretend like I'd said deep research. But if you think about this, if you were to kind of build this same interaction that I'm showing you here with code, but with pick your favorite deep research tool, it kind of works the same way, except for what do you get back? Well, you get back a report. And it turns out humans are really good at reading text reports, but agents aren't that good at reading text reports. If you come back to Fraser's framework of thinking about proof of work, it doesn't really make it very easy to audit the report that you got back. And so I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we 10x all knowledge work? Right? Because I really want all the functions in your organization to get the same lift that your programmers are getting from this. The company that I have the privilege of leading right now, right? We have 2 people on my team who are programmers that worked for Dave and I when we were doing MSpoke. So I've known these guys for 20 years. And they were remarkable programmers 20 years ago, and they're remarkable programmers today. And certainly over the last 20 years, they've probably become better programmers. But they're so much more productive, not because of the 20 years of experience, but because these tools, the software agents, have made them so much more productive. We need to reimagine all of knowledge work through the same lens that you're seeing happen in software development. And we've been working on this at Growth Signals in one specific area. So many of you may remember when I left to start Growth Signals, I talked about I believe innovation is one of the killer apps for these tools, and I believe it's going to give us a blueprint for lots of different ways to do this. Kind of an update a year after saying that is I actually feel even more like that today. So the platform that we've built does a really nice job interacting with different sources, pulling them together to help you brainstorm concepts, generate those concepts and get different lenses into those concepts, and then manage a pipeline of those. And if you are interested in talking about Growth Signals, I am full on back in entrepreneur mode, so I would be happy to spend as much time as you want telling you about the platform. But for the purposes of this talk, right, this is not meant to be a Growth Signals commercial. I want to come back to this okay, well, what does this AI collaboration stack look like? And I think the answer to that is what you want to make sure is when you end up with an output that's sort of a report like this, you want to make sure that you can actually take the output of that and make it immediately a source like any of the other sources that you're talking about, which can then be integrated into these other workflows. So this is some research that we had done where we sent some agents out to look at, use the academic research APIs, Google Scholar, et cetera, to go and pull lots of academic papers around novel desalination approaches and techniques, right? But then when I get to this report, it's okay, this is a report like any other report. I can read the report, but now I need to be able to take action on that report. So I want to be able to actually take this report and use it as a source to let me brainstorm new ideas that my company could create based on this research. And so now I can use that as one of my sources. I could add other sources to it. And now I can have other agentic workflows happen on top of this. So in this case, we're actually framing out some different how might we statements, which we would then go through a diverge and converge process. That's, again, super relevant for Growth Signals, not as relevant for the talk. Just the point is you're taking the output out of one of these LLMs and you're using it as an input into those other buckets of work. You can also then take one of the things that you generate and you can choose to represent that interesting ways, right? So I can take that, one of the ideas that I came up with, and I can say, okay, give me a business model canvas for this idea. And then I can say okay, well, let's have the agent use those those 4 blocks there, kind of remember the business model canvas, right? The front of the house is talking about your customers. The back of the canvas talks about how you deliver value to those customers. The value proposition right in the middle is where those intersect. So if you think about the front 3.5 boxes there, right, you might want to use that to end up generating another lens into this. And so I can go and I can say okay, take the information from that, use the information that a human has verified to now build me a TAM, SAM, SOM on the back of that, or a top-down market size. And the point here is, if you come back to this, how do you 10x all of knowledge work, and you ask yourself this question, which is like, what's the right AI collaboration stack today? I think this is taking Fraser's term and giving my own definition to it. But I think the way to think about this is the key to this collaboration is humans, structured and semi-structured systems collaborating together in a way where the human can interpret it, the human can verify the representation of what it did, and then connecting that output back to other compute techniques as well as other agentic techniques, right? So if I'm going to do a top-down market size, I should go gather information, I should pull that data back, and then I should use Python to actually do the math to make sure that the calculation for the top-down market size works out as it's meant to. So that's my answer to this, like how humans, structured and semi-structured systems collaborate. But the bigger point that I want to leave you with is when you think about these connections between these three systems, we're doing that in the innovation and R&D space, but I think all of you can be thinking about as you build these systems and you try to get the same impact from your software development agents that you're getting from these other systems, how you can incorporate your own versions of proof of work into the systems that are being built. And with that, I will thank you for the time and hand it back to Jim.